Okay, I know what you're thinking. YouTube doesn't need another fabrication channel. But hear me out. You'll be joining me from the beginning on my journey to become a professional fabricator. If you're wanting to learn to fabricate, sometimes watching the professional fabricators can be a little intimidating. And maybe a novice perspective will be a good addition to your research. I can also add in some of my knowledge as an engineer to help clarify some common practices. Now, simply put, the only way to become a better fabricator is to practice. Now, if you're like me, you don't want to buy a bunch of metal and use up consumables just welding random parts together. But you also don't want to jump right into making something critical like a control arm for your truck. So to practice, I made some tables, and in this video specifically, a shelf to hold my new 3D printer. First, I had to dig out my bandsaw. For now, I just have the cheap saw from Harbor Freight, that at the time of this video is only about $300. I'll come back with a video later to cover some of the tricks and improvements I've made. The steel I'm using for this project is primarily 1-inch A36 square tube. Now, A36 is not a great material for working on vehicle projects, but it is cheap and easy to work with for projects like this table. I start with a quick clean to get some of the mill oil off. Otherwise, your hands will be covered with oil and scale every time you touch this stuff. Make some notes of your design and a good cut list. Plan out your cuts on a full stick of material to reduce waste. I set the spring on the blade to hold it right above the material. This allows me to press a tape measure to the blade to make an accurate cut. These parts will be mitered, but I'm going to cut them straight at the maximum length minus twice the wall thickness. Now I set the machine to cut a 45-degree miter. The scale on the machine isn't bad, but later I 3D printed a jig to make setting the angle much easier and accurate. Now cut the miter right on the inside of the wall of the longest length. This will make a great bevel for welding later on. Bevel the other edges to remove burrs and prepare for welding. Use a magnetic square to hold the tube perpendicular. Use a small hammer to gently tap in place. Welds shrink as they cool, so to help prevent warping, make sure all parts are clamped down as often as possible. Start by tack welding everything together first. If you realize something is wrong, it is much easier to cut a tack weld than a full bead. This will also help avoid the part warping from the heat of the welds. The most accurate way to check squareness is to measure the diagonals. If everything is even, you can go ahead and fully weld the seams. I'm only welding one side and the outer corner, and I'm laying in plenty of fill material. When finished, I'm going to grind down the part to make it look like a single solid extrusion. To make tabs to hold the shelves, I'm using some ASTM A656 grade 80 scrap plate that I was able to purchase from work. Grade 80 doesn't weld particularly well, and it's hell on saw blades, so I'm going to cut these out using an abrasive cutoff disc. Now I drill out the holes for the wood screw. At the time, I didn't own any chamfer tools, so I just stepped up to a large drill bit. Not ideal since it's not the same angle as the screw head, but it did well enough to keep the head of the screw from sticking up. Clean up the edges on these pieces, not only to make them look nicer, but to add a bevel for the weld. I wanted to TIG weld these parts for practice. TIG welding does not have the silica in the weld material to help draw contaminants, so it's more crucial to prep the metal properly. I located where the tabs would be welded and removed all the mill scale with a grinder. Go back and clean the area with acetone before welding. Space up the tab for the wood you are using. In my case, I was using 3/4 inch plywood and I wanted it flush with the top of the square tube. But it may be your preference to lower the plywood below the radius of the square for a cleaner look. Now, I'm not a great woodworker, hence why I'm making the frame out of metal. I measured the offset of the blade to the guide on my saw, and set up a fence using a 2x4 including the extra offset. Now just weld in the rest of the supports to your design. I preferred to TIG weld these, not only for the additional practice, but I also just like the finished look of a TIG weld as opposed to MIG. MIG is also acceptable for this and will certainly be a lot faster. I'm not a great welder by any means, and I'd rather leave it to the experts to give advice. But I will mention that Harbor Freight sells a tiny little bench grinder that is great for sharpening tungsten. Having the metal frame directly on the floor just seems unfinished, so I decided to make some foot pads out of some extra UHMW I had lying around. But there are a variety of available solutions that do something similar. I indexed the blocks to the end of my vise so the blocks would be symmetric and identical. My tip here is to drill this hole first for the tap drill size for the screw you are going to use. By doing this, you can now use the block as a drill guide to drill out the holes for the tap and the frame. Using a small tap and with the soft A36, it was easy to use a drill to drive the tap. Now, the hole in the footpad can be enlarged for the screw. A counterbore will be needed to keep the screw head from sticking out. Once again, I didn't have the correct tool, but for this, a larger drill bit will work out just fine. Clean and paint the frame to your preference. For this project, I wanted to go with a black frame and a dark walnut stain on the wood. My understanding is sanding the wood will open up the grain to better accept stain. This wood I'm using here is what the home improvement store calls blonde wood, and it did not stain well. I think maybe it's more intended to paint? took this shelf up to the house to assemble. It was a little too heavy to carry though. I was able to chuck up a drill bit far enough in the drill so it would drill a pilot hole without drilling all the way through. And you can see here I had previously made an entryway table for my wife. This design allows for a lot of customization and a simple and cost-effective design. What do you think? If you are out there looking to start fabricating your building, I hope this video could help inspire you and give you confidence. Keep watching my channel for more, and I hope to see you again. Thank you for watching.